How does AI help marketplaces, large platforms like Amazon, Uber, or eBay? How does AI help to solve the problem of supply chain optimization and pricing on such platforms? And how does this knowledge relate to charities and supply chain of food relief? Following is my conversation with Ram Bala, Associate Professor at Santa Clara University School of Business, author of an MBA course on artificial intelligence, a visiting associate professor at Kellog School of Business at Northwestern University, and a seasoned data scientist both in business and within NGOs. Ram, what was the application of AI in marketplace applications so far?
So marketplaces have some unique challenges. Any typical reasonably sized marketplace will tend to have a fair amount of variety in supply and demand. And it doesn't matter whether it's a marketplace for physical products or services. So the challenges in any marketplace relate to two things. One is estimating what a degree of fit is between supply and any supply service or object and the demand for that. And the second part is, even if I know how good a fit is, at any given point in time, are we able to like find a balance between supply and demand? And how do we balance that using the tools at our disposal, which is trying to like price those services and products well as thinking about how to allocate the capacity appropriately. So AI is used in both of these endeavors, right? And you can think about marketplaces of different kinds, and this is used in whether it's a transportation marketplace like Uber, whether you're talking like a more retail marketplace like Amazon, or it could also be like Amazon's marketplace where there are many third-party sellers, right? So as well as things like a talent marketplace where we're trying to match people with jobs, talent with jobs, and so the estimation part is the difficulty of that varies depending on the marketplace. For instance, let's say if you are thinking about matching a car with a car and driver with a rider in Uber, it's relatively simple. I think it's you have only certain kinds of cars, and there are some very specific criteria about how close, let's say, for example, a driver might be relative to a rider. And so those things, usually govern exactly what the degree of fit is. If you talk about, let's say, something like a product marketplace, like let's say Amazon's third-party marketplace, I think that it gets a little more complicated because you have to understand whether certain products actually fit a particular customer's needs or not, right? And that usually there are many features that go into a product and the needs of the customer. And then you have the most extreme end, which is like a talent marketplace where things get very subjective. So yes, you can somebody might say, here is a job description, but the job description often we find is not a complete picture of what the company actually wants, the kind of person the company wants to hire. There might be important soft skills that are left out of that description. There might even be important related skills that are not really, covered well enough. At the same time, on the talent side, there's a lot of subjectivity in how, let's say, a talent might actually sort of come up with a description of their own skill set and experience. And so the estimation problem of fit is widely varies in difficulty. And, like in a talent marketplace, it gets really complicated and requires more sophisticated techniques. And of course, the market balance problem is everywhere. Whether it's a talent marketplace or whether it's Uber, you're going to have to think about what the right pricing is going to be in the market at any given point in time, and how exactly you would match everybody. And all of those require algorithms and AI to actually tackle those problems.
So the more subjective either side of the market is, the more difficult it is to predict, right?
Absolutely. And in a sense, you're absolutely right. So the difficulty level in terms of predicting what is a good fit becomes much, much more challenging. And then that affects also the market balance, for the downstream. And this is where, if you think about modern LLM technology, right? Large language model, generative AI. This is where I think it's going to have the most impact. It's going to have most impact in trying to understand the fit better, right? So if we could, instead of thinking, like, for example, if you talk about talent marketplaces, instead of thinking about the a job description as sort of like this very rigid construct, if I could simply have a conversation about what is it that a company or a client is looking for, that conversation is likely to be much more informative. But capturing the content of that conversation in sort of a more of a machine readable form is harder, because it's
Much harder.
conversation. It's a natural language, right? But that's where our modern tools are getting so much better, right? So I think with modern LLMs, I think that's our ability to convert that more complex, nuanced information that somebody provides into something that a machine can understand, right? That an algorithm can understand, is really the greatest power that LLMs actually have. And I see marketplaces in general actually sort of getting stronger, even in areas when there is a lot of subjectivity because of LLM technology, right? And then that then affects everything. So for instance, even at the sort of like the market balancing stage and the matching stage, one of the challenges is that what if there is a sudden interruption? There is some issue that happens in the market. Traditionally, the way to kind of like, solve that problem is someone has to go in and figure out, let's say it's a supply chain issue. Somebody has to go and figure out what happened, then change all the parameters of the market to kind of like, or the algorithms involved to ensure that we are able to still match correctly and so on. I think, a lot of the effort in doing that is going to get reduced once we have better LLM, once we are able to introduce LLM technology here, because you are able to then convey your problems that are happening in real time using sort of, let's say, a conversational approach. And that can be converted into like directly into parameters that influence the how the algorithm actually operates and how it might find a recourse or an alternative in case there is a problem in matching, right? That's more the real-time problem. So so I think it's an exciting time to actually be in marketplaces, because I think the more subjective marketplaces are also going to see a sea change in how AI is used, particularly with the introduction of LLMs.
So are we coming to the point that a delivery person that's, drives a scooter in a big city with food delivery will be packed with 3 cheeseburgers plus 1 pizza pepperoni plus fries,
right?
And then an algorithm will tell this person, let's say over phone a posteriori where it should be delivered, because we know that in this very time, in this very place, this 3 cheeseburgers plus pizza plus fries will sell anyway.
Right. And so that is certainly, that's true. And that is going to be much more sort of like understanding the demand at a very hyper local level is definitely going to be something that is going to be in the future. And in fact, that was actually happening even before the current generation of LLMs, where we were really beginning to try to understand like hyper local needs, right? It's only going to accelerate further. What I also think is actually simpler things like, so this delivery person has like all this complex set of things that that this person is being told to deliver. And sometimes it turns out that, traditionally what used to happen is the delivery person comes to a building and realizes that the access to like a doorway is not right. And it takes like 15 minutes to go, around the building. Yeah, right. So there are all these really last mile issues. And often what would happen is a delivery person may either not enter the data related to that issue that happened at all, or even if they enter it, it's in some sort of text form, maybe audio form, usually text form. And the text form is not, no one's really like, parsing it effectively to like understand what the problem is. But now what will happen is, once you have this in text form, you're able to read that effectively, and you're able to translate that into a recommendation next time is, yes, this place needs, you need to have a stack of pepperoni pizzas, but using this stack in this location, you can't please ensure that you go to the other side of the building first, because if you go this way, then what's going to happen is you're either going to like take these steep set of stairs that's going to be very uncomfortable, and and then maybe you might drop something or something like that, and or it may take you too much time. And so that kind of like really granular recommendation in making the transaction actually happen in a frictionless way is going to become much more and more common. I think it's going to be the norm more so than anything else.
Could you please dwell more on how large language models can help with that from the technological or technical point of view strictly? Because I still, on one hand, I do get it. On the other hand, it's not so clear to me because it's, let's say, we've had things like sentiment analysis and all that. So yeah, and ChatGPT is often now depicted as a tool just predicting yet the next word, nothing more, nothing less, nothing more.
That's true. I think I mean there is an entire side of like how the app interaction experience is going to change for a consumer using conversational AI. But let us address that a little later. I think let me address your more specific question on how it's going to impact, let's say, this application that I was talking about, right? I mean, let's say a delivery person delivering something and us actually getting. So I think one of the things that nobody anticipated, I think, was that ChatGPT is incredibly good at writing code. So you give code, so you give instructions and you are able to like generate code. Now, of course, there are two kinds of instructions. So one is a straight up instruction saying like, write me a piece of code that does this particular operation, which it will do. But I think where there's also a business opportunity, I think, is that we can go from understanding, let's say, so let's take a very specific example. A delivery person says, accessing this building is very difficult, and you better be on only one particular corner of this building to be able to take the elevator. Otherwise, you're going to have to like go all around and take the spiral staircase, which is going to cause a lot of trouble, whatever, right? So something like that. Now, this is information that this person is maybe going to type it in somewhere, or maybe say through audio, and it's going to be translated into some words, right? Some words. What we can do is, with the current generation of LLM technology, it's not just about the conversation, it's about converting that into a meaningful form, which says, okay, so let's take this building and in a geospatial sense, we can now say, hey, based on this information, I've read this information, this statement. So now it's just a natural language statement. I can convert this statement into something that is like a particular kind of like geofencing around this building. Like, you can sort of say, okay, don't go here, don't go here, don't go here, don't go here. And then instruct the routing algorithm to actually account for those blocks, right? So you go from the natural language to a geospatial map where there are these access points that are blocked based on understanding that natural language, and then a routing algorithm that accounts for those blockages and then says, hey, don't go this way at all, don't go that way to actually do this, right? So you're going from what is essentially a statement to an algorithm that actually sort of is able to give you a route plan, right? So that is the kind of thing I'm thinking about. And now this is actually a very simple, relatively simpler application, actually. Now you can think about like, many other applications. So I'll give you another one. So for instance, let's say you're doing, and these will seem like extremely sort of like physical operations, right? One would wonder how LLMs would affect that. So one startup that I've been talking to, like this is sort of again like in warehouse operations. One of the things that actually, so you want to be like any warehouse, you want to be efficient, you want to move things faster. Like as orders come in, you want to move like products faster. And your system, your warehouse management system, in its current form, it can only capture certain aspects of how the warehouse is designed, where exactly the obstacles are, where exactly the products are located, and so on and so forth, right? And you can sort of like get. But what we can now do is and that can work most of the time, but there'll be situations where it so happened that it turns out that every once in a few weeks on a Thursday morning there is this shipment that arrives, I don't know, is it like it's full of like produce that has a particular odor, and it is actually stocked in the middle of there, in the middle of the of a particular lane, And this blocks, nobody wants to go near it. People kind of go around it, and it makes things very inefficient, right? Now, this information is captured nowhere in the system. It's like, if you go to the warehouse system, you don't realize. So suddenly you see the data. What's happening on Thursday mornings? Why is my sort of entire operation slowing down? Because, then you realize that, somebody, there was some lapse in sort of like this, this handover process, and somebody just kept it like in the middle, and this happens very periodically. And now you can sort of say, somebody can go in and say, hey, this is what's happening. You kind of, you type out that situation, right? And now we have a mechanism to understand that, and this now translates and gets stored in some form in sort of your warehouse system, right? So like your regular data capture system, that here is a annotation saying that, okay, this is what's going to happen on on certain days, for instance, right? And I can keep going on. I mean, there's the same true with healthcare, where healthcare, what's going to happen is that, we're talking about, I mean, the healthcare, of course, leads you to issues of privacy and all of that, but I think we need to kind of figure out some of those issues. But I do think that, for example, like doctors' notes, for instance, in most healthcare systems in the US, at least now, doctors will actually write very elaborate notes, and these notes are actually captured in in sort of as whenever they see a patient, right? So there are the check boxes that they have, the typical standard check boxes that are like structured data. And then there's the unstructured part, where I think you're feeding all this information about what you saw. It's not about that information is not about the individual patient alone. It's really adding value to to the knowledge that we have, right? So here is a patient. So the doctor notices something, a correlation, which a doctor notices something, some sort of association, which is not captured in the regular data. Now you can read that, and you can see if you can make some associations. Hey, patients in a certain geography who displayed a certain symptom also happen to have some other issue, and that then becomes important, like public health information, right? So it can then be used. But then the wealth of that information often is in the natural language. It's not in the and yes, we have natural language right now which can parse words at a certain level, but LLMs today can understand context in a way that traditional natural language processing tools could not. I mean, I think that is, and it's a generational leap in how we going to be able to understand that language. So,
does it lead us to a new kind of economy with running at kind of hyper speed?
I would say
in a way of prices optimization, allocation of resources.
Right. So, short answer, yes. And I think that is sort of my goal, right? I think in the sense, as somebody who for a long time now has worked with data and has believed in the power of using data in whatever form, not just the one that we measure quantitatively, but also the data that we speak, the information and the knowledge that is embedded in sort of like our conversations, using that wisdom to actually make things better for people, right? I strongly believe in that, and not just businesses making and making more profits, but also quality of life improving, right? Whether it's in healthcare or whether it's in quality of life improving in the context of supply chains or and all other areas. So I strongly believe that we are going to get hypercharged in that direction. But I don't think you're going to see the change happen overnight. I know right now there's a lot of hype. I feel that we are right now in this phase where we're all trying to figure out exactly how. So I've given you some examples of how we might use this, but it's going to be a process, right? I think I would say then for the next 5 years, you're going to see changes, but those changes are going to look like small incremental changes here and there. And the part of the reason there is also, one is you're trying to figure it out. Secondly, I think the other issue is that change is hard. Like, for instance, I give you supply chain examples, but traditionally, if you look at any company's supply chain, I mean, there are lots of incumbent existing processes that are difficult to change, and introducing even basic data analytics sometimes can be very challenging. Forget about using AI technology, right? So I think it's going to take some time to that change, but then you're going to hit a point. So right now there's a lot of hype in just conversational AI, and maybe there's going to be like some action there, but that LLMs are eventually going to like affect everything we do. But that this acceleration is still a few years away. You're going to see a lot of action in the startup space right now, but I think getting to a point where all of a sudden you realize that it's in everything, every action you take is everything that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. AI in particular, like LLMs and other kind of generative technology are embedded in it, and are driving other kind of domain specific ML models and optimization models. That's going to becoming a part of life. That's going to happen. It's going to take a few more years, but I think you are going to see that change, where I think it's going to be embedded in everything. I think it's sort of like, to me, it's comparable to the moment when the mid 90s, when the internet became so common, right? For a while it was like, a lot of people are saying, oh, will the internet actually make it a big difference? There are all these interviews of famous people where they're being questioned, hey, what does the internet do that we cannot do already, right? And then suddenly, by the time late 90s came around, I mean, the world changing rapidly, and in fact the internet is continuing to change the world even today, right? So I think it's and the same thing is true with, I think we are at that kind of a moment right now with AI, where rapid change is happening at a fundamental level, but it's still not infiltrated our lives completely yet, and people are questioning whether it can. But all signs in my mind are that it will. In the next few years, it's going to be all over the place.
So, because most people today are succumbing, so to say, to this hype. Yes, we'll have a new breakthrough next week, and there will be AGI in 2 weeks, and in May we'll have the end of the
Yeah,
world, or at least the end of the world as we know it. And yes, I do agree with you
yeah,
that that's still to
yeah.
implement it.
I'm going to put out maybe a controversial opinion out there. And maybe it's not controversial. It's more focused, right? I'm not as concerned about AGI. I mean, maybe AGI is a threat, maybe it's not. To me, that threat pales in comparison to what you can actually accomplish positively in the lives of people. And I like to focus on sort of what I can do constructively. That is that's a space that I have worked in all along. It's like, it's marketplaces, supply chains, trying to like make matches better, trying to like get the right product and services to the right people at the right time at the right price. And to me, those are the kinds of problems that making lives better is really what preoccupies me. And I believe there's a lot of potential there, right? I mean, is AGI the sort of like, is AGI going to solve our problems? I don't know. I mean, I really think that at the end of the day, or is it going to be a threat? I don't know, honestly. I really think that, to me, a great AI product or solution today for any meaningful application that will improve people's lives is going to be a combination of modern LLM generative technology with domain-specific models that we have been building for many years. And that combination and that hybrid approach is where I think real value resides in my mind. Because I think that traditionally the challenge is the following, right? We know, for instance, you can train a domain-specific model based on the data you have, but you're missing some critical pieces. So, for example, let's take a talent marketplace. Based on my knowledge, I can say, okay, some skills are related to each other, so I can identify those patterns in my ML models, and I can account for those in creating the features in my ML models. But there are, but I don't know, I don't have the understanding of the whole internet or the whole world, right? And that is what LLMs allow you to do. They are now saying, okay, we've looked through all of this, and we're able to say that these skills are related to each other. And now that is great information. That is processed data, pre-trained processed data that I have, which I could not have as an individual company or a person. I would not have been able to invest the resources and the technology to actually get to that point. I can only use my own proprietary data and domain-specific models to do whatever I can do. And maybe I'm doing a great job right now, but I can do even a better job once I have access to these, this understanding that these LLMs actually provide about like relationships in the world between like different skills and associations, right? And so that intersection marriage of like domain-specific models and those sort of like and LLMs and modern generative AI is really going to be where I think a lot of value is going to reside. And I'm really optimistic about that value. And I would like to sort of like, keep focusing on what positive changes we can actually do while being mindful of the fact that, yes, there are going to be privacy issues. There are going to be like other kinds of, guardrails you have to put against negative things. Yes, for any technology, that's true, right? I think I'm skeptical about is sort of saying that this technology needs to be abandoned completely because we are so scared. I don't think. I think we are missing out on the value that we can actually drive. So
You have experience in applying AI into supply chain for charity during COVID.
yeah,
Could you tell us a bit
yeah,
about it?
absolutely. So I think I'd done a little bit of like nonprofit humanitarian work before 2020, but COVID was really my strongest introduction to sort of like working in the humanitarian field and applying this. And what was exciting to me was, and apart from the difficulty of the situation, it was exciting to me that I was able to apply sort of my skills. I was wondering whether how could I help, and I reached out to my entire social network and I basically said, look, it seems like supply chains are going to get impacted, particularly for medical supplies, PPE, particularly, right, and also food. I have this skill set. How can I help? And one thing led to another, and I ended up connecting with these medical doctors based out of Harvard and Brown, and who had started this organization called Get Us PPE for matching donated PPE with healthcare facilities that could not afford it, right? Because I think the challenge was during 2020, as it is, I think like healthcare facilities located in like marginalized areas, actually they have less resources, they have fewer resources to actually like acquire this. During COVID, the market prices of some of these things just went up, so it went to the roof, and it became very difficult to actually sort of like procure them in the market, right? And COVID was sort of like on rising, and so this was an opportunity for me to to sort of like how can I impact that using data? And so I think the idea there was to be able to like systematically analyze that data, be able to forecast trends of where exactly PPE is required, and then also adopt the right matching algorithms to match the PPE with facilities that need it the most, right? And we actually deployed like solutions which could be the algorithms were deployed as an API. Then there was a front end screen, like somebody could go in and feed in all the data, and when they could upload the data, and it could give them like matches, and they could adjust those matches, sort of human in the loop, so to speak. And it really worked, right? And I think it kind of took off, and people loved it, and it was very useful. The thing that I thought was intriguing about this entire exercise was, there are many aspects of let's say using AI to run a humanitarian supply chain are very similar to any large company. I mean, like you have to think in terms of like how to balance the market, how to keep track of costs, but there are some aspects that are different. So in a for-profit supply chain, you're always thinking about like margins, right? What markets are you selling into? What is the price? Here, you're not thinking in terms of price. You're thinking in terms of what is impact. And measuring impact can be difficult. So there was an entire team, that bioethics team, that was actually measuring impact of like, okay, so if we went with this particular facility, supply to this facility, we have limited supply. So if you supply to this facility, this PPE, how much impact is it going to have to them given their health profile and other kind of factors, right? Other kind of like equity and other kinds of factors. And so so we had to incorporate those kinds of objectives in our model. So the objectives are not about profitability, They're much more about sort of like impact relative to the cost that you're. But the costs you're investing in are important. And in fact, I began to realize that in that context, it's almost like you're running a startup, because it's like you have donor money coming in. The donor money is what is being used to, let's say, maybe transport this. And you have to keep track of the burn rate, right? You have to keep track of, like, how much money you're actually burning on, on a weekly basis, because you want to conserve the donor funds. Because unless you conserve donor funds, you cannot, use it for the, you have to stay alive to use it for the next day, right? So and you got to make some choices about, it's not how balancing impact with the, how much money you're spending, and you got to make, tough choices. And using an algorithmic approach is actually a good thing, because it drives consistency in your approach, right? As opposed to, like, a single individual saying, hey, let's move it here. The algorithm actually tells you, hey, given all these factors, let's balance this out and actually move this from this location to this location. So yeah, so it was a very great learning experience for me, in terms of understanding how to reorient these solutions to a humanitarian context. There are some commonalities, but there are also differences, in terms of the objectives and so on. They're a little bit different. Yeah, and that has continued. I think I've continued to sort of, like, we are working currently on sort of like hunger estimation. So they're trying to see if, like, for example, when there is a natural disaster, often what happens is, sometimes phone lines are still working, right? So the cell phone lines sometimes might still be working, and so people actually are trying to search for, like, where is food available, where is humanitarian aid available for food, for instance. And we've actually seen trends in the data where the Google searches actually correspond to they're highly correlated, they're predictive of, the geographic locations where people are actually sort of, like, gathered, and they might need, like, food support, for example. And so we're using that to sort of, like, those kinds of tools and technologies to do hunger estimation, so that we can actually move the emergency supplies of food and all that to the right places. So I think there's a lot to be done in this space. And I think AI in general, I think, will have a great impact on the social dimension as well.
It's incredible listening to you. And actually, it's a very strong reflection that in the times of ChatGPT, and in the times when we are thinking whether we will reach AGI or not, there is still food shortage on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point that you mentioned, right?
This is actually mind-blowing in this conversation to me.
That's right. And I actually think there is a relationship here where we can indeed use these modern tools like ChatGPT to solve these problems. It's not like, in a country like the US, obviously, food shortages or these kinds of issues, they are not, the scale of the problem is less than maybe in some other countries. But the fact that even in a country like the US, it exists, it comes up periodically, is mind-blowing. And it does happen. And, we still aren't truly in a world where everybody has access. Even the last person, even in the richest country in the world, has access to everything. It doesn't happen like that, right? So the world is complex in that sense. But I think these tools are useful, because if you can digitize conversation, and you can begin to understand conversation better, I think more voices will be heard. And that is the way I look at it, is that if, right now, I think what happens is that somebody says something, or has a concern, we're not able to, like, capture it. Nobody hears it. It's lost it's lost in history, right? So I actually think that, yes, it is at some level paradoxical that we're talking about AGI on one hand, and we have, like, food insecurity. But I also think they're related, in the sense that we can use modern technology to actually solve some of these problems. So I'm hoping for a world where we're able to use these kind of technology to completely solve these problems, right? So yeah, hopefully we'll get there.
How to deal with stakeholders in applying AI, both in business and in the NGO sector? Are there similarities? Are there differences? How it is?
So apparently, so that is an area where, interestingly, there are more similarities and differences, whether it's for profit, or it's a humanitarian or NGO sector. because at the end of the day, so the two steps of the process, I think everyone gets fascinated by the topic of using fancy technology and AI to solve a problem. And this is true whether it's in the for-profit space or in the NGO space. I think there is a fascination, and that's good. I think that's the marketing side of things, right? I think that gets me involved in the conversation. But what I've always noticed is that doesn't sustain very long. What you need to do as soon as you get your boots on the ground and you're having these conversations with the right stakeholders is actually getting alignment on objectives. You'll be amazed at the number of times senior stakeholders, and this is true not just in the for-profit case setting, but it's also true in the NGO setting. So in fact, in the NGO setting, it's probably even more true, because I think you don't have simpler metrics like profitability or stockholder, shareholder interest to go after, right? It's a little more complex in the sort of in the NGO nonprofit setting. But in both those settings, I think what happens is that the first conversation I'm always having is, okay, I'm going to talk to all of you, and I'm going to have you in the same room across the table, and I'm going to ask you, like, are we aligned on the metrics that we want to go after? That's one. Second, once you're aligned on those metrics, what's the methodology, and do we have the right access to data? I mean, that's the second question. Oftentimes, I think any AI effort is impeded completely because of lack of data in the right level of granularity, whether it is right scale of time scale, or whether it is we don't have it at the right geographic granularity, or we don't have the right identification of certain things. So one is alignment on objectives is the first thing. Alignment on the data sources and how we're going to use it is the second thing. And only after we have had that conversation, I come back to the earlier piece of, like, okay, now that we've done that, let's now start talking about what deployment really means here, and what the roadmap for that is going to look like. Even there, I think I have a cautionary note to all the time, is that yes, this can drive benefits. I'm confident it will drive benefits, but it's not overnight. In any real system, an existing system where you're trying to transform, you're going through an AI transformation process, it is going to be hard. There are going to be people who are going to worry about their jobs at stake. You're going to convince them. You're going to make them part of the process, right, of transformation. You have to get feedback, and things improve, but they improve slowly at first. And it takes a while to get to the point where you can really start getting the benefits. And I think it's important for all the key stakeholders to remember that. Sometimes you get lucky. I think in a nonprofit, in the COVID scenario, I think one of the things there was faster alignment on objectives because we were in an emergency, so we could move faster. But sometimes it's, in most situations, I think it takes longer to find alignment and get feedback and improve and so on. So I think that would be my process, right? I think it moved beyond the sort of the song and dance to talking about alignment on objectives and data, and then also kind of have this sort of a realistic roadmap of when we will actually see the benefits. So I think that's what I would say.
You're an author of an MBA program on machine learning. How to teach business people about AI, and how it was before ChatGPT 3.5 and after.
I would say there are three levels. So 3 levels to teaching of AI. One is the most technical level. I think this would be at the level at which somebody who's actually going to be hands-on with the code and the math models, and actually going to build the systems from scratch using themselves using the right tools. So I do teach technical courses which are at that level also. The second level is a more managerial level, like a more let's say middle management level, right? Which is more about, okay, I understand some aspects of this technology, so you do need to give them some technical information, like when to use a regression versus, let's say, a neural network. I mean, or deep learning network, right? So I think a simple regression was deep, and there are cases where you don't need a deep learning network. You may want to use just a simple regression to solve a problem, right?
In banking, for instance.
Right. And I think it's in that context, it's often about giving them the knowledge and the power to like make the right choices about the right technical choices. They are not necessarily the ones who are going to be writing the code, but they need to know enough about how this is being applied to be able to make the right choices in which kind of model and approach to use, right? Both in terms of the methodology as well as the tools kit that you might use to kind of solve that, right? So that's kind of the middle management level of things. The highest level is really what I just talked about a little earlier, which is thinking about how can this transform my company. So that's not just about choice of specific tools and techniques and methodology. It's really about thinking about, can I, is it worthwhile for my company to become an AI first company? Number one. Second, what does it, if yes, what does it take to become an AI first company, right? Let's define that ambitious objective. And you can have like relatively more simpler objectives, like, creating more data, a data strategy, for example, and all that. But let's take that most ambitious objective and thinking about that, the organizational transformation, which is like the people, the technology, and the processes that need to change in order to make that actually happen, right? So, and that part, I actually think is dramatically changed because of, ChatGPT, modern.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That part has dramatically changed because more and more what's going to happen is, it is already beginning to happen. I mean, but more and more what's going to happen is we are moving into a world where it's not about data science as a service. Like, it's not like, okay, I have a problem, I can, there is some analysis that gives me some insight, and then based on that insight, I go make a decision, right? Prediction or prescription, I go make a decision. Now that is still going to be there. I mean, that's not going away. I mean, people are still going to be involved in making decisions, and those decisions will often require some sort of predictive capability, right? Which is going to continue to be there. But what is really transforming the world of work is that work itself is becoming autonomous, right? So it started with something like, let's say, a simple thing like Uber, for instance, where the standard dispatcher on a taxi cab service is replaced with an app that can actually do the dispatching on its own, right? It can match a car with a and a human being gets involved only when there's an emergency, honestly. But that idea that there are certain parts of work that can be completely automated because they are very relatively routine, that is accelerating, and that is going to affect every company. And so an executive today, like a director level and above executive today, cannot avoid the question of, how is this going to change not just my decision making, but the nature of my work itself, my workplace itself. Are you going to be doing things differently, completely? Or are the steps that we put together in a process for how we accomplish a task, are they going to completely change, right? And how do we ensure that transformation happens in the best way possible? And it requires all the things I already talked about, which is alignment on objectives, alignment on data, managing people's expectations, all of that, right? So all of that is going to be involved. But I think that's so I think I definitely make that a big part of my teaching. I think so those are the three components to it. The more you teach like business people, you're talking about choice of tools, and at the most senior levels, you really want to talk much more about transformation. I think that's really what you want to talk, or that I like to talk about.
I would like to add a cherry on the cake that such a reflection of mine, that we are all, I think, to learn kind of indirect work, as I call it. That, let's say, our intellectual work, and I think this relates to all white collars at the end, from a university professor like yourself to some, I don't know, financial analyst somewhere, is like, to work through an autonomous intermediary.
Yeah.
And this is something we are not accustomed to.
Right.
And this is something that I think that nobody, even Sam Altman of OpenAI and all these guys, are not prepared for.
Right. Absolutely. I think this idea that we're all going to have to deal with autonomous agents being an integral part of our life and our work. I think it's going to be a change that's going to get some getting used to. But I believe it will be net positive. I think I'm confident that we will emerge out of this. There will be some sort of like transition, and but I think we will emerge out of this. I think better than what we were before. So I think I'm certainly very optimistic about it.
Me too. Ram, thank you very much for this conversation. It was a huge pleasure to have you.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. Great opportunity. Thank you.
I'm certain that it was a huge intellectual delight for our audience. And I do hope this is not our last conversation. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Machi. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Sherpa Search on Tech. If you have enjoyed the show, please subscribe to our show wherever you listen. Thanks again. The Sherpa Search on Tech podcast is a production of Sherpa Search, an executive search firm specializing in the tech industry, helping hire the right people for expert and managerial positions, and advising how to build and develop long-lasting, high-performing IT teams. If you would like to learn more, reach out to us at maciej.szczerba@sherpasearch.tech or visit our website sherpasearch.tech. See you next time.